I'm American, and the fastest way I learned how weird our patriotism looks from the outside wasn't through politics or news. It was through small, ordinary moments, coffee shops, classrooms, apartments, where I'd do something I thought was completely normal, and people would react like I'd just walked in wearing a billboard. The first time it happened, I was in Berlin. I wore a shirt with a big US flag on it because in my head it was harmless, like wearing a band tee. A German guy in the cafe looked at me, not angry, just genuinely puzzled, and asked if I was on my way to a rally. I laughed and said, "No, I'm literally just getting coffee." He hesitated, then said something like, "Here, people who dress in flags are usually extremists. So, are you trying to signal something?" That question hit me harder than I expected, because I wasn't trying to signal anything. I was just doing what Americans do without thinking. He went quiet for a second and then said, almost to himself, "That explains a lot." And suddenly my fun, patriotic shirt felt less like fashion and more like a costume I didn't know I was wearing. After that, I started noticing myself. Like, really noticing. I was studying abroad in Norway, and I kept mentioning I was American in casual conversations, like it was a credential. Back in America, as an American, where I'm from, it wasn't even intentional. It was just automatic, like I needed people to know my country before they could know me. One day, a Norwegian classmate called it out in the calmest way possible. He said, "We're proud of Norway too, but we don't announce it all the time." Another student added, "We try to show it by how we live, not by how loud we are." Later that night, I replayed the conversation and realized I'd said America over and over, and none of them had even said Norway once. It wasn't that they lacked pride, it was that they didn't need to perform it, and that's when it clicked. I'd become the stereotype and didn't even feel it happening. Then I stayed with a host family in France and made the mistake I'd been trained to make since I was a kid. I casually declared America the greatest country in the world. Like that's a normal sentence adults say. They didn't get offended. They just exchanged a look. And the dad asked, "Greatest in what?" I gave the classic vague answer. Freedom, opportunity, the whole inspirational poster package. He said, "We have freedoms. Other countries have opportunities. What exactly makes yours the greatest?" I panicked and reached for the emergency exit that always wins arguments back home. The military. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "The biggest military makes you the most powerful. It doesn't automatically make you the best." And their teenage daughter, without even trying to be mean, said, "Americans talk like they're winning a competition without checking who else is in the race." That line embarrassed me because it was so accurate. I realized I'd never been taught to justify the claim. I'd just been taught to repeat it. The flag on everything thing kept haunting me in different countries. In Amsterdam, I put a flag outside my place because it felt homey, like decoration. My landlord knocked on the door looking concerned, asked if I was all right, if I was homesick. I said, "No, I just like showing it." He explained that where he's from, people hang flags on certain days for certain reasons. Doing it daily looks obsessive, like you're trying to convince yourself. And then he said something I hated hearing but couldn't unhear. "It looks like propaganda." I took it down the next day because I suddenly saw it the way he saw it. Less like pride, more like marketing. A British friend later gave me the cleanest explanation I've ever heard. I told him Americans are just more patriotic. He laughed and said, "No, you're more nationalistic." I asked the difference, and he said, "Patriotism is loving your country. Nationalism is needing everyone else to agree your country is superior." Then he listed things Americans do that I'd always treated as normal background noise. Chanting the country's name at sports games, wearing flags like a uniform, bringing up national greatness unprompted, turning everything into a competition. He said, "People who are genuinely secure don't have to announce it that often." He called it insecurity, and it stung because I knew exactly what he meant. And the weird part is, I didn't need to go to a university lecture to learn this. I learned it from students. I taught English in South Korea and wore little American flag socks to class. I thought it was cute. A student asked, dead serious, "Why do Americans put their flag on everything? Clothes, cars, food, even underwear?" I started to explain that it's love, that it's pride, and another student said, "But if you love something, Do you need to keep announcing it? My parents love each other. They don't wear matching I love my spouse shirts every day. The class laughed, and I laughed too. But it wasn't just a joke. It was a mirror. They were pointing at something I'd never questioned. The way Americans perform, belonging like it's a requirement. That's when I started to suspect American exceptionalism isn't a fact we discovered. It's a story we sell, loudly, constantly, and sometimes even to ourselves. And when you take that story outside America, people don't always react with admiration. Sometimes they react with confusion, sometimes with discomfort, and sometimes they look at you like you're walking around wearing an ad you didn't realize you'd agreed to. After that, I started catching myself before I said certain things. Like I'd feel the sentence rising in my throat. America is the best. And I'd stop and think, best at what, exactly? Because outside the US, people don't respond to that line with applause. They respond like you just claimed you're the smartest person in the room without showing any work. And the scariest part is how normal it felt to me before I left. That's how deep it goes. You don't even realize you've been trained to brag. I remember being in Sweden, sitting at someone's kitchen table, and I did the classic thing. America is the land of the free. I said it like a comforting phrase, like a lullaby. My host didn't argue emotionally. She just asked a question that makes the whole slogan wobble. Free from what? I started talking about government control, because that's the phrase we're taught to say. She didn't even raise her voice. She pulled up a few rankings: press freedom, personal freedom, economic measures, and calmly showed me Sweden sitting above the US in a bunch of categories. I tried to rescue my pride with the Constitution, because Americans treat it like a magic spell. She shrugged and said, "Most democracies have founding documents and rights frameworks. Why do you assume yours automatically makes you freer?" And when I stumbled, I reached for the one American escape hatch that always ends conversations back home: guns. She just gave me this look and said, basically, right, the freedom to get shot. It offended me for half a second, and then I hated myself because I couldn't honestly refute the point. What she said next was worse because it wasn't a joke, it was diagnosis. She told me Americans often confuse freedom with, "I can do whatever I want and nobody can tell me otherwise." She said that isn't freedom, it's selfishness with good branding. And I wanted to argue, because that's what my instincts were trained to do: defend the story at all costs. But I had this weird moment where I realized I wasn't defending my actual life. I was defending a slogan. Ireland gave me a different kind of lesson. I walked into a pub wearing a shirt that basically told people, "If you don't like America, leave." I thought it was edgy and funny. An Irish guy bought me a beer, smiled, and said, "That line is hilarious, because Americans say it to immigrants who can't just leave. But Americans themselves rarely leave America long enough to test whether the best claim holds up." And that one landed because it was true. I'd lived like America was the default setting of the universe, and everywhere else was just a variation. I'd never earned the confidence. I'd inherited it. Germany hit me again later in a classroom discussion about patriotism. I said something like, "Americans love their country more than anyone." A German student didn't even disagree aggressively. She just said, "No, you're louder about it." Then she explained how Germans think about national pride, good governance, social stability, taking care of public spaces, investing in people, not turning flags into a personality. She said Americans wave flags and chant, but then refuse to support basic systems that keep people healthy and educated. "That isn't love," she said. "That's performance." And everyone in the room nodded like she'd just stated the obvious. I sat there feeling exposed, like someone had pointed out that I'm wearing a costume and I can't pretend I don't know anymore. Canada was the place where I learned you can't win that argument once someone refuses to play the emotional game. I told a Canadian coworker the old line, "America is the greatest country in the world." He didn't get mad. He didn't mock me. He just asked, "Greatest by what metric?" I said, "Economy." He mentioned median income, poverty, social mobility, stuff I didn't have a clean comeback for. I said freedom. He mentioned indexes where Canada ranks higher. I said military, because of course I did. And he said something I'll never forget. So, your biggest proof of greatness is how much money you spend on weapons while your own people struggle with basic health care. He congratulated me like it was a joke, but it wasn't even sarcasm. It was this quiet, cold clarity. And I realized how often Americans measure national success by the ability to dominate, not by the ability to care for the people living inside the borders. Then, Finland embarrassed me in the most wholesome way possible. I visited a school, met these kids, and I made a stupid little comment about America being the best. A 10-year-old raised her hand and asked, genuinely curious, if America is the best, why does Finland rank higher in education, safety, healthcare, and happiness? Not as an attack, like a child asking you to explain a math problem. I had nothing. The teacher smiled politely and said, Americans are often taught to believe they're the best without needing evidence. She called it indoctrination, not patriotism. Indoctrination. I left that building feeling like someone had quietly pulled a curtain back. France hit my nerves in a different place. I mentioned saying the Pledge of Allegiance every morning as a kid like it was a cute memory. A French colleague looked genuinely disturbed and said, that's terrifying. I asked why, and she said, because you're making children pledge loyalty to the state before they're old enough to understand what they're promising. She said they study countries that did that, and those countries weren't exactly famous for healthy democracies. I defended it, of course. It teaches patriotism. She said, no, it teaches obedience. There's a difference. And that line kept echoing in my head because it reframed my childhood in a way that made me uncomfortable. And the more uncomfortable I got, the more I realized the discomfort was useful, because it meant I was finally seeing the difference between quiet confidence and loud validation seeking. It meant I was seeing how many of our normal rituals, the flag everywhere, the chants, the constant declarations, aren't proof of love. They're proof that we're constantly trying to convince ourselves we deserve the love. That's why now when people say Americans are the most patriotic, I don't hear pride anymore. I hear anxiety. I hear a country that's desperate to be admired because deep down, it's scared to look honestly at itself without a slogan in front of its face.